Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to Books and Books. I would say good evening, ladies and gentlemen, but I think I'm the only gentleman in the room. So I use that term loosely. Sorry. Welcome to Books and Books here in Coral Gables. My name is Steve Moss. On behalf of everyone here at the bookstore, welcome. While you are silencing your cell phones, please take a moment to familiarize yourself with the Books and Books newsletter. This will give you a synopsis of all the engaging events we have here at Books and Books every night of the day and every day of the week, many of them being live streamed, as you can see by the lights and cameras. You can pick up a copy of this, or you can go online, give us your email address, and we can forward you the information. A couple of note worth mentioning, upcoming in March, Dave Barry, James Grappando, T.D. Allman. We even have Shamar Rinpoche, the great yogi, going to join us here Wednesday in the store. As I say, you can pick up a copy of this at the counter or go online. While we love to have you here in the store, of course, you don't need to be if you prefer to watch online. You can call the store while the event is in progress, and you can either ask a question of the author, or you can call and order a book that we will ship to you free of charge anywhere in the U.S. Overseas might be a little bit more. But tonight we're very pleased to welcome Iris Krasnow and her books, Sex After, Women Share How Intimacy Changes as Life Changes. The best-selling author of The Secret Lives of Wives offers a refreshingly straightforward guide to enjoying a long, satisfying sex life. Women of the baby boomer generation know and trust Iris as a writer who speaks candidly to the issues that concern them. As with all of her books, since her New York Times bestseller, Surrendering to Marriage, the narrative is driven by real women's stories, raw, intimate, and most importantly, true. Sex After is Krasnow's signature take on everything you always wanted to know about sex, but were afraid to ask during all of life's passages. She's a New York Times bestselling author, journalist, professor, and professional speaker. She lives near Washington, D.C. with her husband of 25 years. We're very pleased to have her here in Books and Books. Please welcome Iris Krasnow.
Thank you so much. You have to stay because we need a man in the room. So it's so funny that, sometimes when I give talks, a man has arrived. So thank you so much for that introduction. And this is so fun for me because I have my cousins here. I have my Camp Racket Lake friends here. I have one of my students from American University here. And I really love Miami. I've been here for 3 days, though I got to tell you, we've been staying on Brickell Road. And everyone is under 30, and their heels are really high, and their pants are really tight, and they all have cleavage. I don't know, and everyone is so beautiful and youthful. I was thinking, and I'm not going to talk about, although I might, about sexual insecurity. And one of the things that I try to do with my work is to shatter myths about perfection, is to write about the frailties of life and to write about real people with real issues and really imperfect bodies. And one of my favorite interviews for this book was with a woman in London, England, who wrote a play called Second Date Sex. And the play was about how awkward it is, how sex can be really awkward. And, we see these glamorized, photoshopped, beautiful images of perfect-looking people. And a lot of us look over our shoulder and think that people are having more sex, better sex, more perfect sex. And so in these 320 pages, I uncovered, I believe, the real truth, and there is no normal when it comes to sex. Everyone has issues, everyone has problems, and through the voices of real women and some great men in here, people tell their stories, and hopefully there's something in here that everybody can relate to. So I'm going to tell you why I wrote the book, how I worked, and what I learned, and a little bit about the journey, and I'm going to just read some snippets from the chapters. So I spent the last 2 years crisscrossing the country in between teaching at American University, and this student here, Joan, she was in my feature article writing class at American University, and so they really heard about this book and the process. I interviewed 150 women, ages 20 through 92, and they're real women. They're not Hollywood women. They're come in all shapes and sizes, all ethnicities, all income brackets. And I interviewed sex therapists such as Dr. Ruth Westheimer. I interviewed a urologist to talk about prostate cancer, and my friend Ann up here in the front row gave me the name. I wanted to know the top urologist, and I figured that there would be a top urologist in Miami. Not that, everyone in Miami would need one, but just that people age very well here and they live a long time. And so, and I think that when I started this book, I really didn't know what I was going to find out. But one of my missions was to find out how dangerous is my 20-year-old's hooking up culture? Why do I love my new baby and loathe my new husband? We have sex at most once a month. How often is it normal for a married couple to do it? Will I ever want to sleep with anyone again after my painful divorce? What can I do about menopause? How will I resume our sex life after breast or prostate cancer or the amputation of a limb? What can I expect from sex when I am in my 70s and 80s? What the hell is a penis pump anyway? I didn't bring one, but I did want to, I did try to find out what one was, and I asked one couple what one was, and the man was so great. He goes, I got one upstairs, and he brought it down. I wanted to bring it home, but they said they needed it. So, people always ask me, I'm a journalist, I'm not a psychologist, and I'm not a judge. And so there is a chapter in here on sex after infidelity. And when I write a lot for Huffington Post and Slate and other outlets, and when I write about infidelity or adultery, I get letters from people that say, how dare you write about this? Don't you know that God thinks this is awful? You're going to rot in hell. You're going to sizzle with Satan, etc. But I just write about what's out there. I write about what's happening. And I think that even 5 years ago, I do a lot of books on women's issues. It was very tough to get people to open up about their relationships. It would be like prying open a stubborn oyster or a stubborn clam, and it would take a few glasses of wine. And I noticed with this book that it's really not very hard to have people talk about their intimate lives anymore. And one of the reasons is that we live in such an over-sexualized society that, I think that what we're witnessing and what I chronicle, and by the way, I don't think it's totally unhealthy, is the new sex revolution. When I was coming of age, I'm 59, at the beginning of all my classes at American University, it's always my birthday on August 31st. And so I've had 21 birthdays there. And I always say, so today's my birthday. How old do you think I am? And usually they'll say, they want age, like, 43, 44. And so this year on August 31st, I said, today's my birthday. How old do you think I am? And nobody raised their hand. And I said, I'm 59. And this guy in the back row goes, whoa. And, I thought he was going to say, whoa. He goes, whoa, I thought you were much older than that. That was the wrong answer. And he didn't. But it wasn't because of that. But anyway, so, one of the therapists I interviewed, well, if I were to reduce this book to one line, it would be, if we can adapt our minds to our aging bodies, to our changing bodies, anything is possible in sexuality. And even though this book is called Sex After, Women Share How Intimacy Changes as Life Changes, sex is never just sex. I would say this is really a book about intimacy and about love and about commitment and about the many layers that go into a relationship after the sexual crackle ignites things. So I'm just going to walk you through it a little bit. I started the book in the hooking up culture. I start, every chapter is named like Sex After College, Sex After the Honeymoon. The honeymoon's over quickly. Sex After Baby, Sex at Midlife, Sex After Menopause, Sex After Prostate Cancer, Sex After Breast Cancer, Sex After Infidelity, and then the Giddy Golden Girls. I'm going to save the Giddy Golden Girls for last. But in fact, Jessica Berry who's in the second row here. I interviewed her for the book because she's not only gorgeous and in her 20s, she runs a little company called, maybe not so little anymore, Power Coaching Today, and she counsels people in relationships. And I just thought Jessica was so wise because many of us, I have 4 sons in their early 20s, and many parents and grandparents would write me often and say, "What's with this hooking up culture?" Everyone, and I get letters like this, it just seems like they're all sleeping with everybody. It's random, wanton sex, and what's love got to do with it? And there's a lot of fear among parents about what these kids are doing, as there were fear among our parents about what our generation was doing when our motto was "Don't trust anyone under 30." So Jessica, I asked her a lot of questions. We spent hours and hours in interviews. And Jessica speaks from the heart of a woman who not only counsels other people, but happens to be dating in Miami, which is, this is just one hot town. The weather is hot. The people look hot. I'm hot right now. And I know that a lot of times, I often tell people, and I speak in Florida a lot, that I feel like I could do all my research in Florida because it's just full of a lot of wise people that are alive. And I mean that as not opposed to dead, but just alive of spirit. And many of you came from other places to live here. So here's Jessica's, I said, "So Jessica, what's really going on? What is the really going on?" Because my generation thinks that people are having so much sex in their 20s that they have a failure to really recognize true love when it comes along. So here's Jessica's take on that. "I see a lot of women confusing sex with love. Their usual MO is to get physical first and deal with the emotions later. As a result, they suddenly find themselves with ridiculous expectations about a guy that would normally be indifferent about, they would normally be indifferent about simply because they've been having mind-blowing sex. It feels like love should be the next step, but that's not how the guys generally see it. Observing my circle of single girlfriends, I'd say 2 things. Most of them are having sex with someone, and most of them are hoping the relationship deepens into something else. It is not easy for women to keep their hearts from getting bruised. Women, for the most part, are just not capable of having non-emotional sex." Well, I thought that was just worded so well. But I'm going to read another snippet from another woman I interviewed who met a guy on a bus, and 20 minutes later she brought him to her apartment. I called him the man on the bus. But she said that when her emotions started to change, when when there's sexual chemistry at any age, and you start liking that experience, and then you start having fun, emotions come into play. And one of the myths that was shattered for me in the Hooking Up chapter was, 2 things. I'll tell you. The first one is I heard over and over from young women, well, the guys just want sex. They don't think with their heads. They think with their blank. And, and when I interviewed young men, and I did, when the men got down to it and they were really honest, they were saying things like, you can't help but have a sexual experience and not have your emotions get tinged. One guy said to me, and it's like ripping off a little piece of your heart every time. And so overall in this chapter, my aha was that even though now we're calling it hooking up, and in our generation we called it the hippies and free love, the truth is, coming away from this chapter, I didn't find myself so fearful of this generation because overall, and I talked to Kinsey researchers as well who've done far-flung longitudinal studies, most people still hope that a pleasurable sexual experience, that when you're having fun, will lead to some kind of emotional relationship, will lead to some kind of commitment that goes farther than 2 weeks. And I was really proud of one of these girls I interviewed. She said, that she was very, very, very into this guy, and they were having these, quote, great hookups. And then one day she said, you know what? I told him I suddenly was becoming very emotional, and I explained to him that I wasn't 100% happy to keep things casual. I was clear about how I felt, and I gave him the opportunity to say how he felt. He said, you know what, I understand, but it's like, why would you leave this? Don't I make you feel good sexually? I was like, no, that's not it. I just want something more reliable. And, and I heard that over and over again, is that in this world that's so chaotic on so many levels, even if you live in beautiful Miami and you have this fabulous weather all the time, we live in a really chaotic world, a scary world, and people want that connection. And, so sex is our most perplexing and pleasurable primal need. But over and over, once you got past, texting is the new courtship, or, I could text someone right now and be in bed with them for 30 minutes. But the subtext often was, I really like this person, and I really want to see this person again. Another myth that I wanted to shatter in this book is I have had 4 kids, and that's a lot of, and some of you probably have more kids, maybe less kids. Those of you who look the best have no kids. But, we have these Hollywood images of the blathery new mother who's in full makeup. She's lost her 63 pounds in 2 weeks. She's just nursed her baby who's beautifully slumped against her chest. And many new mothers think, gosh, I don't feel like that. I feel like crap. And so I did a really long chapter on sex after baby, just to shatter the myth of the blissful new mother. The truth is, most women, a majority of women, suffer from some degree of postpartum depression. Some of it's severe. I interviewed a woman in this book who wanted to commit suicide. She didn't. God, and that's good. But and I interviewed an OB in this chapter who told me that, we tell women that after they can have sex again after 6 weeks, and many women take me aside before, because the husband comes at the 6-week visit, and she said many women take me aside and will say 6 months, say 6 years, because it's just a really, really, really hard time in a woman's life, which she said to me, I would say 95%, this is a top OBGYN in Washington, I would say 95% of my patients have no interest in having intercourse at 6 weeks. Women are exhausted. Given a choice of sex or sleep, she'll take sleep. The body is basically self-preserving. It can't afford to get pregnant again, so it just shuts down the ability and desire with no ovulating and no libido. There can also be a lot of stress and conflict in their relationship over the newborn. A partner may think he isn't getting enough attention, or the mother may think he isn't helping out enough. The societal expectation is that this is a wonderful and blissful time. You see the vignettes of the nursing mother, calm and rested, thin, and she has makeup on. Who has time to put makeup on? New mothers barely have time for a shower. This sets up such unreal expectations. Okay. So I am moving on to the Sex After Infidelity chapter. I'm doing the Cliff Notes, but I'm just sort of breezing through. And the book is chronological. It goes from hooking up in your 20s. And, my editors kept saying, well, why don't you say hooking up in your 20s to hooking up in the senior centers, senior communities? But I don't, it's not, the women and men I interviewed in the senior communities certainly don't think of their dating patterns as hooking up. But I was interviewed on the radio today. Sorry, with these glasses that I can't see and I can see. I was interviewed on a serious, not serious as in serious, that was serious, but Sirius XM radio show. And I got a question from a caller about, well, what about adultery? What about it? The truth is, I've interviewed a lot of people over a 35-year career about relationships, and there's no accurate statistics about infidelity because everyone lies about sex. It's not like you could go door to door and say, so, has anyone in here had an affair? Because you wouldn't get any accurate statistics as people would lie. However, most sex researchers, sex therapists, and people who study intimate relationships would estimate that about 40% of marriages at some point somebody is not faithful. And that can go one of three ways. Way number one, somebody comes home and says, I haven't been faithful and I'm in love with this other person. And it's true, and that marriage is over, at least for a while, although I have interviewed people who have left long-term marriages. In fact, I interviewed a guy who married 3 Debbies. They all had brown hair, and he kept marrying Debbie, and he kept waiting to be happy. And so on the 3rd Debbie, and this was a period, I go to him, I've been doing this for a long time, and I actually called him recently. And he's not in this book because his story never changes. I said, he didn't call them all Debbie. One was Deb, one was Deborah, and one was Debbie. I thought that was good. However, they were all brunettes. So I said to him, he goes, yeah, I know this isn't going to surprise you, but I really miss my wife, the first Debbie. I said, really? He goes, yeah, it's just never good. These marriages are just never good. I said, really? Well, did you ever think what the problem might be? He goes, yeah, I know. I take myself with me, right? I said, yeah, you take yourself with you. So the second way this could work is that somebody is unfaithful and that person is remorseful, regretful, and truly sorry. And there's never whole forgiveness or whole forgetting, but they move forward. And then the third way that this works is, and this is just from all these thousands of interviews I've done over the years, is that somebody cheats on someone else and there's no forgiveness. They said, you're a jerk, you've done this before, and I don't want to be married to you. So this is what one of the women that I interviewed, she's actually a high-powered judge in Arizona, and unfortunately her affair played out across headlines all across the state of Arizona because her husband was a high-powered lawyer and he was having an affair with another lawyer. He was disbarred and it was horrible. And she was married to someone Jewish. She's Catholic. And this all happened during the time when her kids were having a bar mitzvah. So she had to coach these kids through the bar mitzvah while her husband, who was Jewish, went to it turned out he had a drug addiction, and he went to dry out. Anyway, she moved on, and he was so remorseful and so regretful, she took him back. And these are her words. I would not have been able to move on had my husband not expressed deep remorse for the pain he caused our family. If he had been arrogant and not sought treatment, this would have been a different story. He looks back at this awful time and puts his head in his hands and has cried. My marriage now, though, is better and more intimate than ever. We are in this with our eyes open. You try to forget and you try to move on, but have I forgiven him? I have on most days, but it is a lot to survive adultery. You start to question every aspect of your life. You tell yourself, I wasn't sexy enough. I wasn't good enough in bed. I wasn't worthy. That's why he turned to another woman. What really helped me become intimate with my husband again were both his expressions of genuine remorse and lots of reading on the topic of affairs. Elizabeth Edwards, remember John's wife, book was great. She described the mistress as someone peering through your living room windows and wanting your life. No one else is getting my life. Another thing, and I hear this a lot when people are going through painful divorces or other kinds of splits, this woman became physically strong. In fact, she said, my healing has been greatly helped by my physical accomplishments. I'm getting stronger all the time, really strong. I started doing CrossFit. I can push press 100 pounds over my head and deadlift 200 pounds. I can do unassisted pull-ups. And, she said, as I became physically stronger, I became emotionally stronger too. So I do a whole chapter about sex after divorce, and I'm not going to read this to you, but I'm going to tell you some of the surprises I found out. And again, I'm not a therapist. If you're therapists out there, maybe nothing surprises you. Very little surprises me, by the way. I always think I've heard every story imaginable. But I think I was surprised by how many people stay married and never have any intimacy. And I'm not only talking about sex, I'm talking about intimacy. No touching, no kissing, no cuddling. And maybe they're, have, and I found again, and I'm not apologetic that I'm just a journalist, not a judge or a therapist, because I think people tell me almost everything, because if I was a therapist, it'd be really expensive. But, it surprised me how many people stay in relationships that aren't feeding their souls. For the sake of the family, they're not abused. They don't feel physically abused. They just are at a standoff. I call it a sexual standoff. But it's more than sexual. They don't even say a civil word to each other in the morning or in the evening. A lot of it is very busy two-career couples who don't have time, to even really exchange pleasantries or kiss or hug. And one of the best women that I found, and again, I wanted to find somebody who said, enough, I'm not living like this. And so one woman left a marriage where there was no touching at all. She said, and she's become a divorce coach, which means she coaches you through a divorce if you have no intimacy. And she's from the South, man, and she just tells it like it is. She said many women have a skewed reality. They think, oh, this must be normal in long-term marriages not to have any sex. Well, listen, honey, it's not normal unless both people are on the same page about their sexuality. Some need it, some don't. There is a plethora of ways to create intimacy with another human being, but sexual bonding and intimacy is a primary way. I can tell you in my divorce practice that 99% of the time, the reason a couple comes in here and splits is not from feeling sexual, or it is from not feeling sexual or intimate or adored at all. And when this has been going on for years, the majority of the time, someone is involved in an affair. So here's what I tell them. I left my marriage and I found that sex can get better with age. It certainly has for me. Oh my God, it really has. I have a deep appreciation for the power of orgasms and the importance of embracing my sexual needs as I age. I am very comfortable with my sexuality, considering what I went through. So I'm going to talk a little more about the women in their 70s and 80s. I'm going to first touch upon the new divorcee, I call her. But I did find another of the surprises, and again, and this seems to be getting the most media buzz, this book's only been out for 2 weeks, is that I found that women in their 60s and 70s and 80s and in long marriages, or some recently widowed, and we can talk about that too, had a sexual confidence and sense of what intimacy really means beyond the flesh, and a sense of adventure and playfulness and general joy about sex, much more than younger women. And that was so hopeful because, in your 20s, you're floundering. You can be the coolest, smartest 20-year-old in the world, like Jessica Berry here, and still these people are coming in your office and saying, it's confusing. It's confusing. Sex is confusing. Sex is not, and you're floundering, and then you're in your 30s, and you have a new marriage, the honeymoon's over, you get married, you're thinner than you've ever been, you're wearing a dress that, costs as much as a down payment on a Jaguar, you've got 200 people there, it's bliss, and then, you have a new baby, you have new in-laws, you have a new mortgage, and someone snores, and you're sharing a bathroom. And then, and then throw an infant into the mix. And so those are not peaceful, easy years. In fact, the most popular juncture for divorce is at the 2-3 year mark and the 15-16 year mark. 2-3 years because it's just, whoa, this isn't what I signed up for. It's too much. And 15-16, you're sick of each other and you're raising teenagers. So, I know that some of you remember an era, and I remember an era too, is growing up, very few people were divorced. Very few of them were probably happy, but, divorce was still kind of the big D. Now, 43% of marriages end. It's down from 50%. And everybody knows somebody who is divorced. And divorce over the age of 60 is happening in increased numbers. One of the reasons, obviously, is people are living longer than ever. In fact, women in their early 90s are the fastest growing segment of the aging population. So if you're miserable at 52, after 20 years of marriage, you can figure, God, I've got 45 more years. I call it the Tipper Gore syndrome, who at 60 said, Al, this ain't happening anymore. I don't know what happened with them. Also, it's from another reason. I talked to one divorced woman, very successful. Most women are in the workplace. Most women, and I'm not saying every woman, is in a position where financially they can take care of themselves. And again, some marriages need to end, and everyone doesn't stay married, and some marriages do need to end. This woman said, I don't feel the need to marry anyone else. I'm substantially better off right now than I was. Many women friends are staying in their marriages because of money. I don't have to, and I like that freedom. I'm getting my needs met. She's dating her pool boy, and he's not a boy. I know. I couldn't believe I found her. People always say, how do you find people? And I just, I'm introduced to someone, and they say, Iris writes about relationships, and I met this woman at a party in Chicago, and she took me aside, and she said, I'm older than you, and I'm dating my pool boy. And she said, do you want to meet him? And I thought he'd be like 20. And he was 52. He was like a pool man. But I did think it was I did like the story. And they're still dating. But she was interesting because her mother stayed married for 52 years and didn't have a job. And they did not have a very good marriage at all. But the mom felt like she had to stay in the marriage for financial reasons. So the new woman coming up, and it's not every woman, but the new woman coming up who has a job and is really in clearly a relationship that, it's not always about physical abuse, but that sears your soul, that doesn't build your self-esteem, that doesn't feel connected. We don't have to live like that anymore. My books are about love, marriage, and commitment, but they're also very real about what people do go through and the choices. We have so many choices we can make right now. And another thing, I'm always asked, what's your takeaway? And I told you one of my takeaways, if you can adapt your mind to a changing body or aging, anything is possible with our sexuality, men and women. But, another of my takeaways, and there's no gold standard marriage or gold standard sex life or how you should be or how you shouldn't be. And if you want to be married for 20 years and leave that marriage for a while, some people go back to their original marriages. Some people find a whole different path in their lives. And I think the best thing we can do for each other is not judge each other's lives and not compare our lives to other people. Everyone in this room probably knows somebody who you think is happier than you are, who you think has a richer love in their life, who's, sleeping with somebody who doesn't have a paunch like the person you're sleeping with, man or a woman. But, nobody knows what's going on behind closed doors except the two people in it. And that is really empowering. So if there's a couple I know that we go out to dinner with them, not very often anymore because it's a little disgusting, but, they go out and they're this couple that they're always calling each other sweetie, like 5 times in a sentence, and they sit with their legs twined and he dangles anchovies in her mouth when they're eating Caesar salad. And you just think, can you guys just, stop this? And, we're always thinking they're so twosome-me. And then, I know her pretty well now because, I ask the hard questions when I get my girls out away from their partners. And I said, so what gives? And she said, this is how we are in public, but this isn't who we are at home. That it's almost like the public persona gets brought out. So I'm going to tell you about a couple of my favorite women in the Giddy Golden Girls chapter, and then I'd like to take questions. I end the book with a chapter called The Giddy Golden Girls because I loved the women that I met over the age of 70 and 80 and 90 who were again, it's not like, oh gosh, we're, having sex in the back seats of cars. It was just like they knew who they were, and some of them were very adventurous, and they were just inspirational in so many ways. And one of the women I met she was 79 when I met her, and she had been married, I think, for 55 years. And her husband, and her husband had been sick for 40 of those years. First he had a heart condition, and then he had diabetes, and then he had another heart condition, and he ended up dying of leukemia. And although she loved him so much, it was the only person she'd ever been with in her life. And I heard this a lot, where a widow or someone divorced in their accepted 70s or 80s had never been with anyone else in their whole life, and they're suddenly dating again. If it's going well, in her case, although she was grieving deeply for the demise and loss of her beloved husband, who she loved, and they had a great life together, I use the word relief lightly, because how can you be relieved that someone's gone? But in a way, it was emancipating for her. It was a lot for her to take care of this person. And so a year after her husband died, she lives in a senior community. A year after her husband died, she started going out with the widower who she and her husband had known like for 40 years. And this is not an atypical story where an older person will connect with somebody they've known for a long time. But in her case, it wasn't just somebody to go to the opera with or the museums. They actually kind of fell in love. And I watched it happen. I knew her during her widowhood because she had appeared in one of my other books. And sometimes when someone's a really interesting character, I'll keep calling them, like the guy married to 3 Debbies. If he marries a 4th Debbie, I think he really will need some therapy. So anyway, this woman whose husband died after a very long and painful illness, she was dating again, and I saw her. She said, we had known this man for years because he lives in the same community. He had lost his wife too, but he had many paramours after. I could tell he really liked me, but he was very patient with me. He would ask me out. I would say, no, I'm not ready. But he was very persistent and romantic, and he would send me long-stemmed white roses every 2 weeks. When I finally went on a date with him, it was New Year's Eve, and he told me she's 81 and he's 83 at this point. When I finally went on a date with him, it was New Year's Eve, and he told me he had a temporary front tooth. I'm thinking, oh God, my luck. I kiss him at midnight, I'm going to choke on the tooth. Whether it was my fear or I was still afraid to touch another man, at midnight I wouldn't go near him. He kept pursuing me, though, calling and say, whenever you're ready. Then about a year after my husband died, Stephen asked me to go to Paris with him. I said, okay, I guess it's time to try you out. My husband was the only man I've ever been with, so being intimate with another man was very scary. But he was very kind and respectful. Without giving you details, honey, let me just say, I feel wonderful, like a teenager. He tells me the only thing I want to do the only thing I want you to do is to look beautiful and sexy. Look, honey, it's not teenage sex, but it's very satisfying. We love to cuddle and snuggle. This man, my God, he's a gem in every way. Whether it's spiritual or cultural, it's so romantic, it's almost electrifying. Now, that sentence is really the core of this book. It's of the mind. I remember interviewing another woman in her 70s who was dating again, and she said, it's got to be a mental match. It's got to be a mental match. And so intimacy is so different than just sex. So she's saying the closeness, the love. This is sexual and intimate and exciting beyond exciting to discover another person after all these years. After he got that tooth fixed, a kiss led to more things, and our life just keeps getting better and better and better. And after taking care of someone so ill for so many years, this feels so fantastic. We are writing our final chapter together, and we are loving every minute of it. Finding love in my 80s is like opening another world I never knew could exist. I would never think at this stage of my life I could have this. Not only do I have a golf partner and a bridge partner, but the sex part is very interesting. Look, honey, it's not 50 Shades of Grey, but it's definitely warm and beautiful. So I loved her. And, I'm not saying, and obviously, how could I say this, that everyone could end up finding, this breathy teenage sex, at any point. She made me feel like going to take a cold shower. She was so effusive about it. My mother lost my father after 34 years, and she was 65. She never went on another date in her life, ever. And she just stayed frozen in time and in love, and wasn't ever interested in anyone else. And again, you can't judge that person, just like you can't. This woman, when I interviewed her, was very much like, oh, my friends are going to kill me. Like, they loved my husband so much. She really was sort of writhing in guilt about moving on and moving forward. So anyway, it was a really interesting book to research. I know that from the expressions on your faces that you're thinking of 1,000 things. You're thinking of your own lives. You're thinking about love that went awry. You're thinking about love that could happen. You're thinking about getting older. You might be thinking about your own mother and father and their marriages. When I wrote that book, the Giddy, the chapter, The Giddy Golden Girls, I was thinking of my 88-year-old grandmother who had been a widow for 50 years or 48 years. And she never dated, and she wore, very prim silk dresses and white gloves. And, she's so different than the rocking grannies that I met. And I don't mean rocking as in like vampy. I mean, just aging is a lot different than it used to be. It's just different. People are fit. People are healthy. There's new drugs. There's fitness regimens. Everybody's watching their cholesterol. If they aren't, they should. And so, it's just this whole new era. And just to wrap, I feel like what we're witnessing now is a new sex revolution that's in some ways, even though it's scary and there's porn and all that stuff. And by the way, I don't even write about porn. There's no pornography in this book. And people kept saying to me, aren't you going to write about pornography? And I'm really not. We all know it's a, $120 billion industry. And it's not, this is just real people and real relationships having real issues. But what I think my takeaway from this is that, like, when I was growing up, the sexiest television show, I told you, was Love American Style. Did I tell you about that already? All right. So, and, it was Love American Style. And the sexiest shot in there was this couple in one episode went to a nudist colony, and all you could see was their shoulders. And I actually think Ozzie Nelson played the father. And you're kidding. Like, you couldn't even imagine. And now we're all growing up in a culture, all ages, where we turn on TV and it's butts and boobs and girls, the television show, and Lena Dunham playing ping pong naked in a thong. And there's a jadedness, but there's also an awareness that people are naked. It's just like, as one of our sons, he is a photographer, and he was showing me this. He did not shoot these pictures, but he was showing me this supplement from some indie New York magazine, and everybody was naked in it. And they were frying eggs naked. They were bungee jumping naked. They were slalom skiing naked. They were climbing mountains. I don't know where the hell they were, but they were all naked. And I said, Theo, what is this? He goes, Mom, they're just people. And I thought that was just, and he meant it. It wasn't, they're just people, and they're just naked, frying eggs for breakfast. And the guy has an apron on. So what? And so anyway, I've talked enough. Deep breath. Does anyone have any questions? What haven't I covered? Any questions? Yes, and tell me your name.
Hi, I'm Noreen.
Hi, Noreen.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I could go
Can't
on.
wait to buy the book.
It's a good one. No, I mean, it really is. No, this is like my favorite book for many reasons, but that I...
You found that there's been a lot of discussion that texting and the social media of today has really brought about more of a disassociation on a personal level between people instead of bringing people connected. So have you found that in your research or as you were going around that in the younger generation that played any context?
I'm going to turn this to you, too. One of the Kinsey researchers that I interviewed said texting is the new foreplay. And so yes, but I mean, how many people in this room are on Facebook? Okay. How many people love it? You know, I mean, so, and how many people really like most of your friends on Facebook? And feel so yeah. So I mean, I'm not avoiding your question. I think that definitely it's so easy to express affection and love, like, you know, and if any of your kids are texting nude photos, you know, get on that right away. But you know, when that leads to people end up having to be together at some point, okay? So you can be like this if you don't really want to get involved, but once you do get involved, I feel that, you know, just what I said in the very beginning, there's still that emotional component of wanting to connect. I don't think people have changed that much over the last 7,000. People want to love and be loved, and they want to feel special in the eyes of the person they love. It's not, you know, we don't really want to have 600 friends, you know. So do you have, like, from your generation, do you have any read on that, or your generation? So this is a 17-year-old, so maybe we can ask her.
I mean, I do think, like what you said, people want to be connected and them to be meaningful relationships. I do think texting cultivates a higher quantity, less quality.
Right.
But in the quality ones, I feel like texting really does. I mean, if you meet someone, I do think you get to know people really well. People are less afraid to share themselves, like, behind a screen.
And so you think that it can actually bring out...
Yeah.
So are you
I think I bring out a lot more vulnerabilities and things that I would have never said on the phone or on a first date, but I'm like, just a heads up, like, haha, and like, I feel more comfortable sharing that.
Because I've worked with a lot of women's groups and youth groups, and I found that there's a disassociation, not on a sexual or intimate level, but generally on a personal relationship level. And you'll see a group of young girls in a mall, none of them are talking to each other, they're all texting, to whom I have no idea, maybe to each other, but so I was wondering if that then transferred into the intimate realm.
I think that this is something that we're examining. I know that as teachers, you know, we're in an over-texting but there's a lot of backlash now. There's people saying, whoa, what about intimacy? So I think that we're going to live through a transition where we have no text zones and where we have disconnecting, and that we want to come back to true intimacy. I want to ask the 17-year-old, like, when you're texting, do you, because I mean, you grew up with this, right? What do you think? Are you always like this?
Me, not so much.
Honestly. Are you a senior in high school?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
My mom, she probably texts just as much as me. Everyone blames it on the younger generation who's always on their phones, but I mean, so is the older generation. It's just, it's there.
It is there. What do you think, Stacy?
I would just real quickly. She in her was it your economics class? In one of her classes, her teacher showed her a video of Marshall Soulful Jones. It was part of the piano solo. I'm a creative writing teacher, and he wrote a poem called "I Touch." I touch, and you should really look it up.
Okay.
And he talks about, you know, this exact issue, and in one of the lines he's talking about, I'm going to text my wife, and he's like, and I touch my wife, and I touch and I text her, and we're gonna have an orgasm on the phone, and and it goes on and on and on, but it starts out from I touch, and I showed it to my 8th graders, and I think it is an issue. She showed it to me. The kids are starting to write about it a lot, and
I agree.
and the problems with it.
Yes.
Iris, I have a question from an online viewer who just called in. Kim says, I was married for 14 years. I had a boyfriend for 8 years. I don't know if at the same time. And I had a younger man for 7. I got bored that they couldn't keep up with me. What category do I fall under?
Did she say how old is she?
She didn't say.
Okay, so you got it. She had a lot of stuff going on. So reread that.
She said, I was married for 14 years. I had a boyfriend for 8 years and a younger man for 7. Again, I don't know if this was all at the same time. I got bored that they couldn't keep up with me. What category do I fall under?
I don't know what chapter she'd be in, but I would say that if you where she's probably watching somewhere, right? Like if I would need to sit down with you. It takes me a long time to interview people, and hours and hours. But I would say there's other stuff going on in your life that you're not telling us, and boredom. And if you were here, I would say the same thing. Boredom very seldom has to do with somebody else. It has to do with something going on in your own heart and soul. And so I would just say you've either not met the right person, or maybe you're not doing work you love. I always think doing work you love is a great stress reliever, and also helps greatly in relationships when you're not depending on somebody else to fill your soul or to make you happy. Any other questions? I know that, yes. Tell me your name.
Becky Fisher. And I have two
You
things.
sure are. You were once married to my cousin.
I was just going to say, my first hookup in life was with your cousin from Las Vegas.
I have a lot of cousins. But actually, and they knew each other. Isn't that funny?
Probably our cousins.
And it's a different side of the family. Well, no, it's...
We were 16 when we met, but
Isn't that funny?
I don't, so I'm from your generation,
Yes.
but I'm a single woman, and I don't think that it's so terribly different from what our kids are doing. I have a 22-year-old and a 25-year-old, and I know in the dating world in my generation, the texting, the emailing, the lack of direct communication is really no different, I don't believe, in our generation than it is with our kids. In fact, I think our kids in some respects communicate better because they see more value in it than people that are much more jaded from our generation. So
That's a really good
I'm
point.
not so sure that it's
So scary.
so scary and something that we have to necessarily worry about with the younger people. I think it's a bigger problem in the older generation, especially in that sort of 40 to 60-year-old category that got caught in that, wow, this is pretty cool, we can text rather than talk on the phone. Because we didn't grow up with it, and it became a very useful way to communicate with people.
And you do know that every text you ever send is permanent, right? Somebody could call up your text. Oh, good, a question from a man. Tell me your name. Okay, talk louder.
My name is Edwin Cano.
Hi, Edwin.
I'm originally from Colombia, grew up in Connecticut. And, I have my share of relationships. I don't know if they're the best relationships or the worst. It's just, I'm by myself, kind of moving on, not looking back. And I always hear these things like in Europe, sex is so open. They practically put sex on TV so randomly and so freely. And this has been going on for ages, right?
Right.
And yet, over there they seem to have more control over their sex, lives and things like that. And I don't know. I don't know. It's not a question. It's just more like what was the issue like here in the United States with the whole sex thing? It's just over here. You're right. The personification of sex here is more like it's just
a big deal.
Yeah, it's just like out there, and then all these kids get all at that age, you start learning about sex, but in the wrong way.
Right. Well, it's
Not
interesting.
in the way that you should know about sex. Like my mom always talked to me about sex, cheap, I don't know if it's the right way to do it to raise a child, but you speak freely about sex with your kids from an early age.
It's
right?
like having alcohol in
Yeah,
little
it's just
bits
like,
when you're 15.
What do you want to know?
I think things are changing, and I write about it in here that there's like a new sex revolution where we're not hiding behind this puritanical facade anymore, like, oh, we don't do that, we're prudy Americans. The truth is, sex is happening. The truth is, love it or hate it, the average age for in our country for a teenager to become sexual and really sexual is 17. I don't know even if that's changed that much in the last. Miami's? Okay, well, and in accepting nudity not as whoa, that's so dirty, and just that it is. But you raise a good point. In writing this, although I've centered the book mostly on Americans, I interview some people in England too, just because I happen to be in England and a little bit of France. But it would be very interesting, and I don't know if I can do it in my lifetime, to do a cross-cultural read of not sex, but just intimacy and relationships. So you raise a good point. Anybody else? Yes.
Question from a caller that phoned in, but you just rather answered his question. He wanted to know whether you interviewed different races,
Yes.
nationalities, and if you found any differences.
It's a great question. I give people a choice of whether they want to use my rule is every story has to be true to the bone. But if somebody is telling like a story, they say, I don't want you to use my real name. I usually have them use part of their real name, a middle name or something, and I don't use the last name. We have African Americans, we have a Muslim in here, we have Latina. We do, and and I have a chapter on coming out after long marriages. I'm often accused of writing only about heterosexual marriage with children, and I admit that even though my books are not memoirs, I do tend to write from my own personal experiences and probably mainstream a little bit, and maybe even a little traditional. But I felt in this book, I'm going to answer that question, but I want to just, I'll forget so I did a chapter in this book on coming out after a long marriage, because I don't want to see a show of hands, but most people in this room probably know somebody who knows somebody, or even is related to somebody who was married for a really long time or married for a short time and decided, you know what, I'm in love with somebody of the same sex. And that was a really interesting chapter to do for me, again, because people didn't want to label themselves as gay or straight. They just wanted to say, I happen to be in love with a woman right now, but I have loved, and I miss men, and they just didn't want to be labeled. So I love that. I did not notice any difference, like if, the black women I interviewed and the white women I interviewed and the Jewish women and the Catholic. Well, I want to talk about Catholics for a minute. So let's put that over there. It's not bad. But I think people generally want to love and be loved, and they want to feel special in the eyes of their beloved. I think people respond to bad relationships in different ways based on finances. Okay? So if a woman is in a relationship, or a man, and they need the relationship for financial security, they may respond to that relationship differently. I did also notice, and it was, just from my journalistic, that some elderly Catholic women who had lost husbands or were divorced felt what they called Catholic guilt about enjoying sex after being married. That a woman said to me, well, sex was for procreation, not for recreation. So I did hear that a lot.
One more question.
Okay. Come on. Yes.
Well, what I want to say was more of a point which echoes two things that you said. One are the financial aspect. I think one thing I always tell women that are my friends is always find your career, find your passion, become fulfilled, and that is the first step, because when you have to depend on a man financially, you will tend to make decisions that are not in your own best interest because of that dependency. So of all ages, everyone you speak to, it's so important to get an education and a career and a passion, whether it's painting or jewelry or whatever it is. And the second thing is that I'm 44 years old, never been married, never have children. I've been engaged twice. Some great relationships, some not great relationships, but that ability to take care of my own self, make sure that I always centered on that I love myself more than I love anyone else, and nothing else was worth staying involved in that wasn't working, after a certain amount of time of trying. So, being free and independent and being able to explore who you are as an individual, which is something that women historically have never had access to. But I come from a long line of strong women and very spiritual women, Christian women, and business owners, even from my grandmothers. So this was something that was very much instilled in me. And even to this day, just maybe a few years ago, my mother said, well, do you ever think you might have kids? She's like, you should, take care of yourself. But she was never that woman, that mother. When are you going to have children? When are you going to get married? When are you going to fall in love? It's just such,
It comes back to, there is no normal, and we just need to support each other's choices. Thank you so much. And I'm going to sign books somewhere. Am I going to sit here? Okay. Thank you. That went well.
Folks, thank you so much for showing up here tonight. And for those of you watching online, you can always call. We'll get a book signed for you. The books are behind the counter for sale. Iris will sign them for you right here. Thank you so much for coming.